Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
And you've chosen a story here about one of the significant things I was mentioning at the top of the programme, tax credits.
Yeah, absolutely. This is Frank Field, who is, I'd say, a Labour MP on the right of the party. He's on the Work and Pension Selection Committee, talking about how tax credits are an unexploded bomb under George Osborne. And I think that's one of the things that could really do for him. I think the idea is that if the economy is doing excellently well in 2020, he's very well placed to take over. However, if something happens, if there's another recession or another crash, or if something like tax credits takes, so they're going to take away money from strivers, the very people that they've said they're on the side of. These people who are on very low wages but are topped up by tax credits are now going to face up to £1,300 a year being taken away from them.
And it's not just Frank Field who's worried, Matthew. I mean, David Willits, who has been a kind of philosopher king in the Tory party for a very long time, is worried about it. Boris Johnson is allegedly worried about it as well.
I think a number of backbench Conservative MPs will be finding out over the next year how many of their constituents are going to be affected by this. Basically, you have two arms of Tory policy in conflict with each other. One is to make work pay, and the other, tax credits, which did actually make work pay, unfortunately the government had to pay, are under attack. So it's going to be difficult. There's a bit of nervousness under the surface.
It is a huge expense, tax credits. It's ballooning at the moment, as of course is the NHS. You've got the Observer story there.
Yes, ministers, open quote, hiding £2 billion NHS cash crisis. It isn't just the Observer. A number of people have been saying that there are enormous problems looming with funding the NHS. I know there always are, but that there is this nerviness under the surface. Jeremy Corbyn and all that has made the Tories feel lucky, but not invulnerable, I don't think.
And this particular story, it's about the watchdog called Monitor, which by now would normally have revealed the figures ahead, and they've been strangely quiet, and the suggestion is they're keeping quiet until after this is all over.
Yes.
I mean, I think that the NHS is something that the Tories managed to neutralise at the last election. I think when most people say, which party do you feel is on the side of the NHS, people say Labour. And one of the reasons they won is they managed to take away some of that fear. But they know it's a huge problem for them if, once again, it seemed to be that the NHS is on the brink.
Well, as I said at the start, David Cameron wins this unexpected victory, wakes up and turns around. There's a huge ray of new problems we're all going for him on. The streets of Manchester will be thronged with thousands of trade union supporters marching against austerity and new laws which the unions say are a fundamental attack on the right to strike. Len McCluskey, leader of Unite, is probably Britain's most prominent trade union leader, and he will be on the march, and he joins me now. Good morning to you, Len McCluskey.
Andrew.
Can I ask, you've written a letter to the Prime Minister. This trade union bill is at the heart of a lot of your concerns, offering a kind of compromise deal with him. What does it say?
Well, it's a solution to one of the major problems that the Prime Minister has raised. He's indicated that he's concerned about the turnout in industrial action ballots, and so are we. And so what I've said to the Prime Minister, why don't you meet us in order to talk about new methods, modern methods of balloting, digital, online, but most importantly, secure secret workplace ballots. If he was prepared to do that, then Unite, for its part, wouldn't have any difficulty agreeing thresholds and indeed time limits for ballots. So it's a way of him extracting a very contentious issue.
If he gave you that aspect of modernisation, you would not oppose the 50% rule for you have to hit 50% of all ballots before there's a strike.
Thresholds.
And thresholds of 40% on essential services. You'd go for that as well.
Thresholds wouldn't be an issue if he'd allow us workplace balloting, secure workplace balloting, which we already have. So this divisive element that no other worker in the whole of Britain, of course, in the whole of Europe, has to abide by, would be removed. And there's also an issue I'd like the Prime Minister to consider. He ran part of his election on English votes for English laws. There's a likelihood here that it'll be English workers that are attacked by this trade union bill. The Scottish Parliament have said they're going to reject it. So have the Welsh Assembly and so have Stormont. So it's English workers, not only the worst protected in Europe, but the worst protected in the British Isles. That cannot be correct. You're going to meet the Prime Minister later, Andrew. Please put it to him.
Have you ever spoken to him?
Strangely, no. I mean, I know it is.
That is odd.
It is odd, because in the rest of Europe, leaders would engage with trade union leaders all the time.
Now, this legislation also has other things that you disapprove of. Armbands have to be worn by trade union officials during strikes and so forth, and there has to be a 2-week notice period before people put stuff up on Facebook and other social media. Now, the truth of the matter is the Tories have won a majority, and this legislation is therefore likely to go through. In the past, you've said that you would go beyond the law in opposing that. What does that actually mean?
Well, it actually means that there are occasions, and our history is littered with it, when bad laws are introduced, even by elected governments, then people have not only a right to oppose them, but a duty to stand up and defy them. That's why we've said repeatedly...
When you say beyond the law, what are you actually talking about?
It means that we will defend our members. This trade union bill, this trade union bill, which is deeply, deeply divisive, and there's all kinds of individuals, Police Federation, the HR professionals, the government's own regulatory body have said that it's not fit for purpose. There comes a time when you have to stand shoulder to shoulder with your membership. And if this law pushes our members outside of the law, what we in Unite will do is we won't abandon our members. If that pushes us outside of the law, then it will be the Prime Minister's responsibility for the outcomes of that.
Now, there's going to be a huge demonstration today, you hope. It's going to be a bit shouty, I'm sure. Jeremy Corbyn has called for a kinder, gentler form of politics. Are your members out there going to be respectful? Are they going to be non-personal? Or are they going to be aggressive and shouty?
Well, I think all of us are going to be on a new path. Jeremy's speech last week at the Labour Party conference was inspirational. John McDonnell's speech was historical, challenging neoliberalism and austerity for the first time. So all of us are on a learning path at the moment.
Does that mean you're going to turn down some of your own rhetoric about the Conservatives?
It may well do. I think the point that Jeremy's saying, it's going to be difficult for me. The point that Jeremy's saying is let's engage properly in the debates that ordinary working people are interested in. Decent jobs, abolition of 0 hours, decent housing, good education for their children. They're the things that people want to hear about.
I must ask you about one area where people want to hear about, where you disagree, I think, with your leader, which is Trident, because a lot of your members work around that industry and so forth, and you're determined that the Labour Party should maintain a Trident nuclear deterrent.
Well, the truth of the matter is that this issue will be resolved next year anyway. I would appeal to my colleagues on the Labour front bench, stop slipping into the trap presented by the media who are looking for division. Next year there's going to be a main gate provision placed before Parliament by the Conservative Party. I mean, Jeremy may give Labour MPs the opportunity of a free vote. Many of them will vote against Trident, many of them will vote for it, but it will go through. Our position is to defend jobs and to defend communities above all else, and it's regrettable that consecutive governments have never seriously looked at credible alternatives.
Nonetheless, if Trident goes through, and that must be the expectation, again,
Yes,
because of the numbers in the House of Commons, we now have a Labour leader who says that he will not, under any circumstances, press the button. Doesn't it make an absolute nonsense of having a nuclear deterrent? Costs all this money, huge amounts of money, but we're never, ever going to use it if Labour get in again.
Well,
it's a bit weird, isn't it?
Well, the truth of the matter is, if we ever got into a situation, does anybody really believe that we're going to get into a world situation where pushing the button on nuclear, a nuclear holocaust is real? This is all hypothetical stuff. And I don't know how independent our nuclear deterrent is. It's the Americans who will tell us whether we push buttons or not. So I think it's an issue that is being created by the media, and I would urge my colleagues in the Labour front benches, don't fall for it. Stick to what people are interested in, which is their jobs and their security and the future for their kids.
Len McCluskey, I'm sure we'll talk about much more of these issues with the Prime Minister shortly, but for now, thank you very much indeed. Cameron, being in a room with a bunch of political assassins isn't your idea of a good time. It was only early this summer that, against almost all expectations and predictions, David Cameron won an overall Tory majority. By rights, he ought to be enjoying a smooth and easy conference week. Well, maybe he will, but looking at the papers, it doesn't quite feel that way, does it, Prime Minister? Can I ask about your big strategic choice? Because we've just seen, I think we can both agree, Jeremy Corbyn leading the Labour Party rather off to the left. And this gives you the option of either hugging the centre ground and saying that's where elections are won, I am not going to go off to the right, or, as many people in the newspapers and in your own party want you to do, moving off to the right, finally sort of smashing the unions, squeezing the welfare state, having an up-down argument with Europe? Which is it going to be?
We will be absolutely anchored in the common ground of British politics. We were given an instruction to deliver by the British people of security at every stage in your life, securing good jobs, apprenticeships, cutting people's taxes, making sure there was childcare there for people. We're going to deliver on those things. So as others are losing their heads and lurching off, we will be absolutely in the common ground, delivering for the working people of Britain.
And if you do deliver for the working people of Britain, do you think you can finally kill off the Labour Party as a serious national force?
Well, we're not in control of what happens to the Labour Party. It seems they have, as I put it, run off to the hills. We're in control of what we do, and there'll be no complacency or backslapping here this week. Maybe a little bit of mild celebration of the election, but the main thing is going to be about delivering for people the things that we promised. And if you look at the things we're announcing this week, you know, for instance, saying we want a 7-day NHS because your children don't get ill between 9 to 5 on a Monday to Friday, delivering, as the Chancellor was talking about over the weekend, leave for grandparents to help out with their grandchildren, paid leave from work. These are things that really help people who work hard, who want to do the right thing by their children and by our country. That's what we're going to be talking about.
Getting a 7-day NHS, 24-hour-day NHS, when money is so tight, is very, very difficult. Our junior hospital doctors are absolutely irate about the imposed changes to their working conditions, which will mean, for most of them, an effective pay cut.
Well, I don't accept that. We want a contract that helps junior doctors. But first of all, you know, we made a very big choice as a government. In our manifesto, we said that we are going to have to make difficult decisions elsewhere, but the NHS will not just be protected, it's getting an extra £10 billion of money during this Parliament, over and above inflation. And that enables us to meet some really clear goals. And I think a 7-day NHS is a really exciting prospect because, as I say, you know, parents and people in our country want to access the NHS on a 7-day basis. Let me be clear, this doesn't mean that all staff in the NHS have to work every 7 days. It just means the services are available. So I can announce today that we will be publishing a new GP contract to get rid of the box ticking and the form filling and to focus squarely.
Because the old one had a lot of criticisms attached to it. They weren't happy with it.
Well, that's right. I don't think anyone was happy with it. So this new contract will really focus on making sure that people in our country can get access to a GP on a 7-day a week basis, 8 in the morning till 8 in the evening. That's what we want to see. Already, because of the steps we've taken, around a third of people are accessing the NHS on that basis by next year, but we want it for everybody, and that new GP contract will help to deliver that. But a 7-day NHS is not just about GPs, it's also about our hospitals, because the fact is there are about 11,000 excess deaths because we don't work properly at the weekend, and yet
that is when people die.
Yeah, and we know we can fix it. Just down the road from here is the Salford Royal Hospital. They work on a 7-day basis. You can have cancer scans, you can have operations on a 7-day basis. So we want to see that in every hospital.
Let me move on to another great controversy here, which is tax credits, because you've used the phrase working people a lot. Frank Fields talked about the strivers. This new proposal on tax credits is going to mean that just before Christmas, 3 million of the poorest, hard-working families, the people who go out properly every morning and see their neighbours' blinds down and so forth, and get buses and do cleaning jobs in hospitals and offices and so forth, they are going to have a huge cut in their income, £1,500 or so. And they're going to get that news just before Christmas.
What we're doing is we're actually increasing the income of hard-working people because, of course, introducing the national living wage, and this is important. Let me just finish this point, and I'll answer the point on tax credits. You know, that will mean, effectively, a £20 a week pay rise next year for the lowest-paid people in our country. And the bigger picture here is...
Sorry to butt in. The Institute for Fiscal Studies says it is arithmetically impossible for that to make up the cut in tax credits that you're imposing.
Well, that's not right. If you take a family where someone is on minimum wage, when you take into account all the things we're changing in tax, in the national living wage and tax credits, that family will be better off. Not least because you've got the national living wage and we're also cutting tax, so you can earn £11,000 before you start paying any tax at all.
This is incredibly important because a lot of people watching will be in this situation. Are you saying that people will not, just before Christmas, be getting envelopes saying you're going to lose £1,500 out of your tax credits?
No, of course, we are making some changes to tax credits, and there's an important big picture here, which is, we're moving from an economy where you had low pay, high tax and high welfare. We're moving away from that towards an economy where you have higher pay, lower tax and lower welfare. And if you look at the tax credit system, it wasn't working. When I became Prime Minister, 9 out of 10 families were getting tax credits, including members of Parliament. So, it was helping families right up the income scale. And, this one more figure, because I think this does help. If you look at the last 12 years before I became Prime Minister, the tax credit system went from costing £6 billion to costing almost £30 billion, but in-work poverty actually went up. It didn't work. Having low pay, taking money off people and giving it back to them in tax credit, much better to let people earn more, keep more of their hard-earned money.
So why is it that somebody like David Willits, who's been a kind of philosopher king in the Tory party for a long time, says this is heading to be an absolute disaster, it's going to be like Gordon Brown and the 10p tax cut and tax rate cut and so forth. It's something that is going to be a big problem. Boris Johnson's very worried about it. A lot of your own Conservative MPs are worried about the effect, particularly right at the bottom. Frank Field has given you a proposal to mitigate, to soften the damage right at the bottom. Are you prepared to look at that at least?
Well, I always look at everything, but we've had the vote in Parliament on tax credits, and I think people do respect this argument that the national living wage, a 50p increase next year, so a £20 a week pay rise, rising to £9 by the end of this Parliament. That is a very significant change that really helps to make work pay, rather than a tax credit system that recycles money back to people.
I can see the big picture and looking ahead and so forth. But for those families who get those letters, it's going to be a very miserable Christmas. Do you accept that?
Well, obviously I accept that we are making changes to tax credits. We're protecting the lowest paid people with the child tax credit and what goes with it. But we're moving to an economy where you get paid more and where you pay less in tax rather than paying more in tax and getting the money back in tax credits. And that is a better system. And also there's another...
Do you have some sympathy for those people?
Of course,
who are going to...
we've, as a country, had to make difficult decisions in order to get rid of what was the biggest budget deficit almost anywhere in the world. And of course, if you don't tackle excessive welfare and make reductions there, you have to either put up people's taxes or cut the NHS or cut education, which I don't want to do. So that's why we went into the election saying...
difficulties, but final question on this. At the time of the autumn statement, will you have another look at this issue?
No, we think the changes we put forward are right, and they come with higher pay and lower taxes.
Let me move on to what Len McCluskey was saying. I don't know if you saw it a little earlier on. He's written you a letter saying if you're prepared to work with the unions to allow more secure electronic balloting at the workplace, he, in return, they will accept the 40% and the 50% thresholds in your trade union bill. To a lot of people, that will seem like quite a good deal.
Well, I thought what was interesting about the interview is the trade unions accepting that these thresholds are right, that you shouldn't have damaging strikes that close schools or shut hospitals or stop underground systems working. You shouldn't have those things without a proper turnout of voters.
So what's the problem with modern electronic voting?
The Speaker of the House of Commons did actually put together a commission to look at electronic voting, and the conclusion of that commission was that it wasn't safe from fraud. So I think there are problems with that approach. And frankly,
are you prepared to talk to Len McCluskey about this?
Always. Look, the
You've never met him.
The TUC do come into my office from time to time, and I've had meetings with them. So always happy to talk to people.
Here is Britain's most influential trade unionist, and the two of you have never met. It's a bit odd, isn't it?
As I say, I met the TUC have been into my office, so they can they can bring who they like, frankly. But the point I'd make is it really too much to ask someone who's going to go on strike, who's going to disrupt people's children's school, to fill in a ballot paper to do that?
Certainly not. But
the thresholds are right, and they've now conceded the thresholds.
What about making everybody wear an armband and making them give 2 weeks' notice to the government of everything they're going to say on Facebook and social media? That seems a little bit, if I may say so, vindictive.
Well, all these measures in the legislation can be discussed as they go through Parliament. The heart of the legislation is thresholds, so that you can't have strikes that are based on a ballot, sometimes years before the actual strike takes place, based on very low turnouts. That's the heart of the bill. That's what's being proposed. A lot of the other stuff you read, frankly, is not actually in the bill.
There's a lot in the newspapers this morning about Europe, suggesting that if you don't get what you want in the negotiations, you would, after all, be prepared to lead this country out of the EU. Is that right?
Well, I've always said if I don't get what I want, then I rule nothing out. And I think
including leading Britain out of the EU
ruling
yourself?
nothing out means ruling nothing out. It's as simple as that. But I'm confident we will get what we need. And, you know, what I want is what the British people want, which is to recognise there are benefits of being in Europe. We're a trading nation. We also get, you know, we get Europe to do good things, like put sanctions on Iran, like stand up to Russia over Ukraine. You know, our strength in Europe helps to get things done. But there are things we need to change. You know, we don't want ever closer union. We don't want to be part of an ever-growing political union, so let's rule that out. You know, we need Europe to be part of the answer to our competitiveness, not a threat to it. So let's sort that out. Let's sort out the welfare issues, you know. So these things, you know, the things I'm aiming for, I believe I can achieve. I think they really matter. They actually take away the grievances, rightly, that we've got about Europe, sort those out, and then we can recommend staying in a reformed Europe. But as I say, if I don't get what I want, best of both worlds. I mean, the border issue is a classic one. You know, we have not taken down our border controls. Others in Europe have. I think we have the best of both worlds of being able to access that single market, but we didn't give up our border controls, nor should we.
And yet there is a pervasive sense, a very interesting leader in the Times this week, that we are drifting towards the exit door, that we're not hearing from you and other leading Conservatives really powerful pro-EU speeches. Meanwhile, the anti-EU lobby is organising very, very effectively, launching next week. Big figures like Nigel Lawson coming out, that somehow, bit by bit, almost without meaning to, you are going to take us out of Europe.
I understand that frustration, and it's partly because, look, I'm involved in a negotiation. I'm trying to get for Britain the things that we need, and obviously, once I've got them, then I will turn around and make the case for staying in a reformed Europe. But right now, I'm fighting to get these things, and I can't guarantee I will get them.
OK, without going into the thicket of the negotiations, Lord Lawson said that if we could have a situation where national parliaments had a veto, again, if we had a situation where EU law was not supreme over British law, he wouldn't necessarily be in the position he's in. Do you agree with him about those issues?
I think I would amend those slightly and say, look, where parliaments in Europe get together and want to block a proposal, yes, that should be possible. That's one of the things that we are aiming for. I think that's important. I think in terms of borders, being able to keep the border controls that we have, being able to make sure that our welfare system, you have to work in it and pay into it before you get out of it. I think these are important. The issue of child benefit, that you shouldn't be able to, you know, come and work here, leave your children in another European country and get British levels of child benefit. These are the sorts of things I'm going to fix.
But you need some big, substantive changes. Owen Paterson says that what you're looking for at the moment is pathetic and puny and weak.
Well, there are some people who want to leave the EU, and I suspect in Owen's case have probably always wanted to leave the EU, and there's nothing I'm going to bring back that will satisfy those people.
Yes.
But, you know, what I'm fighting for is what I would say, again, the common ground of British politics. There's things we get out of Europe, no doubt about it. We're a trading nation. We don't just want access to Europe's markets. We need a say over the rules, and that's what we get sitting around that table. And as I say, we get Europe to do things that matter. Why do we think Europe is about to sign the biggest trade deal in world history with America? Britain put that on the table. That was my proposal, as is the proposal that we have trade deals with China, trade deals with India. We want Europe to sign up to trade with the fastest growing economies of the world. Now, that's not happening. That wouldn't be happening if Britain wasn't there.
So, you know, we ought to... like a man who wants to head for the exit door. Would you regard it as a failure of your premiership if by the time you stood down, this country was out of the EU?
No, what will be important is getting the right deal. If I can get the right deal, that will be a success, and then it'll be up to the British people to decide whether they agree with my success.
If you can't get the right deal, we'll be out of the EU, and therefore it would be a failure.
Well, no, look, in the end, it's going to be for the British public to decide. And frankly, as I say, if I can't get the things that Britain needs, then I don't rule anything out in terms of the role that I would play, because we do need these changes.
Graham Brady says that one of the things that people want to hear at this conference is whether loyal members of your government, cabinet ministers, other ministers and backbenchers as well, if they feel in their heart of hearts they want to leave the EU, have the freedom to make that case? Or will you get rid of them? Will you sack them for doing that?
The time to make that decision is when I've completed the negotiation. I mean, everyone in the government...
There are people this week who want to go onto platforms and make the case against the EU, some of them in your government.
Well, if you're
Do they just have to shut up?
If you're a member of my government, then you have signed up to the process of renegotiation and referendum, and you've signed up to the belief that we can achieve a successful renegotiation. situation. Everyone has signed up to that.
And therefore, the time being, zip.
People can stand up and explain why this is the right policy for the country.
They're allowed to agree with you.
Well, that's
all right.
It's called collective responsibility.
Let's turn to another issue which is on your plate and very, very dangerous at the moment. Now that the Russians have got their jets and their anti-aircraft missiles and their fighters and their troops into Syria, isn't the old policy of let's go back to the Commons and have a vote and possibly start to do bombing runs inside Syria against ISIL now redundant or too dangerous to pursue?
No, I don't think it is, because our policy should be just squarely rooted in the national interest of the United Kingdom. In a way, that's what this conference is about. It's about economic security for our families, national security for our country. Our national security will be assisted, greatly assisted, by degrading and ultimately destroying ISIL both in Iraq and Syria. Today, we're helping others.
The Russians have closed the airspace. They have said you cannot fly here.
That's not the case. What's happened? I mean, tragically, what's happened is that most of the Russian airstrikes, as far as we've been able to see so far, have been in parts of Syria not controlled by ISIL, but controlled by other opponents to the regime. So what is happening is that they are backing the butcher Assad, which is a terrible mistake for them and for the world. It's going to make the region more unstable. It will lead to further radicalization and increased terrorism. And I would, say to them, change direction, join us in attacking ISIL, but recognize that if we want to have a secure region, we need an alternative leader to Assad. He can't unite the Syrian people. He's been the cause, as actually the deputy editor of the New Statesman was saying rightly on your programme. Assad has driven far more people from their homes with the barrel bombs and the brutality than even the brutal death cult of ISIL.
But Putin is determined to keep him there. And if you fly RAF jets across Syria, there must be a chance that we will, by accident, if you like, come into conflict with the Russians.
Well, obviously, we're not going to do that until we have a vote in the House of Commons. But meanwhile, we are supporting the Americans and others who are attacking ISIL in Syria. We have ourselves used drones in Syria, where there's a national interest at stake, and would do so again. Because, be in no doubt, ISIL, this appalling death cult, there are people who are plotting murder and mayhem on the streets of Britain, and we've got to have the capabilities to deal with them, which is why, we've announced today we're going to be increasing the fleet of drones that we have.
We've seen these hideous scenes of beheadings and so forth, but let me ask you about another scene of beheadings, Saudi Arabia, who carry out more beheadings than ISIL do themselves. There's a guy called Mohammed al-Nima in the screen. He was 18 when he was arrested. He is about to be crucified and beheaded by the Saudi government. What's your message to them about that?
Well, don't do it. We raised this case with the Saudis, as we raise all human rights cases with them, and we don't agree with the way that they go about these things, And we've never stood back just because they are partners when it comes to national security. They've given us vital intelligence information that has stopped bombing attacks in Britain. But, we never stint in telling them that we don't agree with them on these human rights issues.
Is it right that we are bidding for a prison contract with this regime?
Well, it's right that we do work with Saudi Arabia, but we wouldn't ever be any part of the punishment that they carry out that you just sort of mentioned.
But the Justice Department is bidding for a contract in Saudi Arabia to modernise prisons there. This seems, this is a regime which is doing appalling things to people day after day, week after week.
There's a different matter between, for instance, helping supply the police or military, but we would never be part of the sort of punishments that they hand out, because we do not. Britain does not support the death penalty.
Their quotes, justice quote
but
system. That's what we're supporting.
We do not support the death penalty in any state, anywhere in the world. And when people are on death row, we always make the point to those governments concerned. And of course, that will continue to be the case.
All right. Now, when you told my colleague James Langdale in your very nice kitchen that you weren't going to serve for a full third term, did you know at that point, was it obvious to you that you were going to unleash the kind of demons of the party, people looking for who's going to be the next leader, endless distraction? We were talking about it during the paper review.
No, what I said was a very simple answer to a simple question. A lot of people
Always
have been
the worst
wondering, would you serve a
Always the
full
dangerous
second
ones.
term? And I said, yes, I will serve a full second term. But then asked the question about a third term. I said, I think 10 years as Prime Minister is quite a lot. I'm absolutely passionate about the job. I leap out of bed every morning with a great honour to do this job. But I think 10 years is enough. Now, the effect it has on the Conservative Party, frankly, I would say, look, it's good. We got a team. We got a team with stars in it. And of course, people will look at some of those stars and think, well, who he or she, would they be able to do this job? Good. But frankly, that's great. People are asking, well, look at this person, look at that person. I want to run a team, and that's great.
And you want to see a proper contest, not a coronation?
Well, it's not up to me.
I remember last time we had David Davis and you having a real contest.
Yeah, well, it was, absolutely. As I said to Jeremy Corbyn, sometimes the outsider wins,
Yes, well, we know that.
But we have very clear rules.
Yes.
Those rules will be followed. It's never a coronation because it's not my decision. It is the decision of the
outsider
MPs and the party
it.
members. And look, I think it's frankly, I have a very clear mandate from the British people. That's what this week is going to be about: delivering modern, compassionate, Conservative government, delivering the security that people want at every stage of their lives, delivering our manifesto. And we've cracked on with a hell of a pace since May at delivering that manifesto. And that's what we're going to do for the next 5 years. And, then in time, someone else will take over.
You mentioned Jeremy Corbyn just now. He said with admirable clarity and honesty that there were no circumstances in which he would press the nuclear button. Would you say the same, or would you say, yes, there are circumstances, however tragic, in which I would deploy the nuclear?
The problem with his answer is that if you believe, like me, that Britain should keep the ultimate insurance policy of an independent nuclear deterrent, you have to accept there are circumstances in which its use would be justified. And if you give any other answer other than that, you are, frankly, undermining our national security, undermining our deterrent, and making Britain in a dangerous world. We've just been discussing
so you would
Putin
press
and
the
Russia.
Button, in short.
I've given the answer, which is if you believe in the nuclear deterrent, as I do, you have to accept there are circumstances that justify its use.
All right, let's move on to another big subject that's been floating around the conference. I am not going to go through all the unproven allegations in a particular book, but I'm going to ask you, generally speaking, you've seen the stuff all over the press, everyone's talking about it. Is there anything more you want to say about those allegations? Is there anything you want to fess up to or particularly stamp on?
No, look, I think everyone can see why this book was written. In fact, the author wrote an article himself explaining, why he was doing this. So I think everyone can see through it. So frankly, I'm not going to dignify it with individual responses. I think people frankly, they've had a look and they've made their mind up.
Well, let's stick to the why, as it were. Why? Because he was once a kind of friend of yours, wasn't he? I mean...
Well, he was a supporter of the Conservative Party, and he was deputy chairman of the party. But obviously, he's not happy with what happened, and he's let fly.
I think he gave £8 million to the party, and he says, he had a conversation with you in which you promised him a senior job in government. The implication is in the Foreign Office. Did that take place?
And you just asked me, was I going to dignify all this book with us? I'm not. Well, that is about the book.
It's about why the book happened, and this is serious because he is suggesting that he came to you trying to get a job in government because he'd paid the Conservative Party all this money.
Well, I think you can tell.
I'm just asking you whether you had that conversation, whether you promised him a job.
Well, you can tell by the fact that he didn't get a job.
He didn't get a job, yes.
That he didn't get a job.
Yeah. Would that have been a corrupt transaction? Had you given somebody a top job in government? I mean, what would I be having a conversation with you about?
Maybe the one thing I will comment on, because it's important. When I became leader of the Conservative Party had debts of about £28 million, money we owed to other people. Including to Michael Ashcroft. I repaid that. I raised money from elsewhere and repaid that debt because I didn't want to be in people's debt. And the Conservative Party today has virtually no debts at all. We have raised money, we've broadened our fundraising base, we've paid off all these loans and paid off all these debts because the party I run, I don't want to be in anybody's debt.
We endlessly talk about donors ending up in the House of Lords and whether that's right or not, but would it be a different thing for a donor to end up in government because he was a donor? Well,
no one should end up in government because they're a donor. Of course, that'd be completely wrong.
Would that be a corrupt kind of deal?
Well, it would be wrong. Look, you can't... I appoint people on merit, on their ability to do the job, not on anything else.
OK. One final question. I promised the last one on this subject. I'm not even going to mention Supertramp. But one final question is...
I did listen to Supertramp.
You did. You are going to fess up to that. That is
it was a long time ago.
That is the biggest scandal
I was young and, all the rest.
Yeah. OK, so let's. So there is some truth somewhere. Let's go back to the non-dom issue, because the other thing that Lord Ashcroft says is that you knew that he was a non-dom in 2009 before you said that you knew he was a non-dom, and that the two of you had a conversation about hiding this before the election.
Well, if you go back to 2009, what you'll find is that actually I said in December 2009 that we should pass a law that anyone sitting in either the House of Commons or the House of Lords should be a full resident UK taxpayer. And that then happened. The Labour Party brought forward the legislation and we all voted for it, and that put the issue beyond doubt.
And so when did you know that he was a non-dom?
I answered all those questions at the time. You can go back over the record and look at the answers that I gave and all the rest of it. But the key thing is that we made sure you could not sit in the House of Lords or the House of Commons if you weren't a full UK resident taxpayer. And quite right, too.
The reason I'm pressing this is that he says you knew in 2009 and everybody else says you knew in 2010, and this is significant.
But
this is
I
not
think we've been,
tittle-tattle.
again, this is back to the reason why the book was written, as an act of, I don't know, his revenge as he puts it. But you can go back over my answers.
So what he says about this is wrong.
Well,
Let me be
you
clear
go
about this.
back and see what I said at the time, which is I endlessly said that someone's tax affairs are a matter between them and the revenue. And then I was clear that if you want to sit in the Commons or the Lords, put this issue beyond doubt and make sure you're a full resident UK taxpayer, which was then sorted out, and quite right too.
Prime Minister, thank you very much indeed. I fear we have run out of time.
I've been getting away with it all my